Doctor Who fans are a vocal, passionate bunch in terms of what they want to see from the show, but when they actually get it, sometimes it's not always what they hoped. I'm Sean Ferrick for Who Culture, and here are 10 times Doctor Who gave fans exactly what they wanted, and they hated it. Number 10. A proper series-long story. One of the recurring complaints about 21st century Doctor Who from fans who grew up with the classic series was that it didn't have enough time to tell a good story. With most episodes only running about 45 minutes, it felt like all the character development and intricate plotting had been lost. While Doctor Who had experimented with long-form storytelling since 2005, from hints of the Bad Wolf in Series 1 to the mystery of Amy's hallucinations in Series 6, these were additional elements for loyal viewers that were bolted on to the Monster of the Week format. So, when the COVID-19 pandemic necessitated significant changes to Chris Chibnall's planned Series 13, classic fans got their wish with a series-long story about the destruction of the universe. However, Flux received many of the same complaints that New Who episodes tend to suffer from. It was too confusing, the resolution didn't make sense, and it was a bit rushed. It seems that the longest, most consistent Doctor Who story is fans being disappointed with what they're given. Number 9. Sylvester McCoy regenerating into Paul McGann. Doctor Who fans are a funny old bunch. When Russell T Davies brought back the show in 2005, there was a portion of the fandom that wanted Paul McGann to either lead the show or film a regeneration into Christopher Eccleston. Back in 1996, this obsession with seeing the handover from one Doctor to another led to one of the biggest issues with Paul McGann's TV movie. Producer Philip Siegel, like many Doctor Who fans at the time, was determined that Sylvester McCoy was to be given a proper send-off, but this decision hampered the show's chances with its prospective American audience. Because what did they get when they tuned in? 20 minutes without the lead actor who featured in all the promotion, and a strange man who falls out of the sky, gets gunned down by a street gang, and then dies on the operating table. For those American viewers unfamiliar with Doctor Who, they must have assumed that this was a new hospital drama led by Daphne Ashbrook's Dr. Grace Holloway, but, I mean, who needs another hospital drama when you've got George Clooney in ER? Rather than entice a new audience, the confusion over McCoy put them off, which didn't help the chances of a new series. It could have been worse though. Certain higher-ups at the BBC wanted Tom Baker to hand the TARDIS key over to McGann instead. Number 8. The return of Captain Jack. The response to John Barrowman's eventual return to Doctor Who was rocky. After being unavailable for A Good Man Goes to War, Barrowman seemed to go off the deep end in his attempts to bring back the beloved Captain Jack Harkness, whipping up fan fervour and even calling out Stephen Moffat at conventions on a couple of occasions. In 2020, Barrowman finally got his wish, popping up as a brilliant piece of misdirection in Fugitive of the Judoon. When he returned properly in Revolution of the Daleks, he got some decent material to work with, breaking the Doctor out of jail, smuggling a vortex manipulator up his, bum, and giving Yaz some uncharacteristically mature advice on having a relationship with the Doctor. And yet, many fans felt underwhelmed by Captain Jack's return. In a satirical story about Dalek law enforcement, which also picked up on the threads of the Timeless Child twist, some felt he was one element too many and wasn't used as effectively as the character deserved. Worse still, the hastily recorded phone call about staying in Cardiff with Gwen Cooper suggested that Barrowman had been quietly written out. If he was, it wasn't for the reason that certain corners of the internet believe. Most likely, Barrowman's US citizenship and international COVID restrictions made any future appearances difficult to schedule. Number 7. The Morbius Doctors Explained. For years, Doctor Who fans have tried to rationalise weird moments from the show's past. Why does Wotan say Doctor Who is required in the War Machines? Does he actually say Doctor Who is required, but his weird computer voice doesn't emphasise the comma? Another contentious moment from Doctor Who history is the reveal of the Doctor's past lives in the brain of Morbius. Some fans posited that the Doctor just invented them to defeat Morbius in a battle of wills, while the production team responsible regularly affirmed that those faces belonged to previous Doctors. Enter Chris Chibnall, who introduced the idea of the Timeless Child, an alternative origin story that allowed the Morbius Doctors to sit alongside the dozen-plus versions of the Doctor that had appeared on screen between 1963 and 2020. Fandom breathed a collective sigh of relief and threw their hands in the air to praise the mighty Chibnall for at last confirming the answer to the Morbius Doctor's mystery. Yeah, of course they didn't. Arguments over the Timeless Child got so heated that if a national lockdown hadn't been instituted, the Doctor Who fans may have taken to the streets in angry protest. Number 6. David Bradley as the First Doctor. When Mark Gatiss' beautiful tribute to the creation of Doctor Who aired in the run-up to the 50th anniversary, many fans were hopeful that David Bradley could even play the First Doctor in a future episode. Bradley was an excellent Hartnell, capturing both the actor's twinkle as well as his occasional bitterness and short temper. Those aspects of Hartnell's character were intrinsically linked to his portrayal of the Doctor from 1963 to 1966, so it wasn't a huge stretch to imagine Bradley playing the role in the main show, especially as Hartnell had already been recast in the 5 Doctors. So it was that, on the eve of introducing the first female Doctor, the 12th Doctor met the first Doctor at the North Pole. Many fans who were keen to see Bradley's portrayal of the Doctor were disappointed by a character who was a bit sexist and chauvinist, a product of the 1960s basically. It was easy to see what Moffat was doing, writing a story about being presented with your younger, less refined self. However, Doctor Who fans saw this as a little bit disrespectful to the first Doctor, and some were not happy about it. Number 5. A Doctor Who spin-off. For those fans who stayed loyal through the poor treatment of the show in the 1980s and 1990s, Russell T Davies' 2005 revival felt a bit like vindication. So massive was the show's overnight success that it confirmed to Doctor Who fans what they knew all along: the show was brilliant, and all it needed was the love and support of the corporation behind it. So when 2 spin-offs were announced to follow David Tennant's first series as the Doctor, it was further confirmation of the show's huge success. And then fans tuned into the first episodes of Torchwood, a gritty, grown-up, sexy Scooby-Doo. And the response was one of confusion. From the opening F-word, to Owen using alien tech to date rape unsuspecting Cardiff clubbers, to the infamous sex gas, this was not what Doctor Who fans were expecting from a spin-off show. It's easy to forget these days, but Torchwood initially received a tepid response, only coming into its own with later series like The Excellent Children of Earth. Conversely, The Sarah Jane Adventures, a children's programme that skewed closer to the tone of Doctor Who, enjoyed a more positive reception overall. Number 4. Thasmin. It was never explicitly there in the writing until quite late in their era, but Jodie Whittaker and Mandip Gill definitely played the characters of the Doctor and Yaz as something slightly more than a friendship. Going back over those first 2 years, there were hints of what was to come later. Many fans picked up on those hints and began shipping Thasmin. When Whittaker and Gill became aware of this, they were keen for Chris Chibnall to explore it further, but disappointingly, the first queer romance between Doctor and companion ended up as something of a bit of a damp squib. While the final 3 specials attempted to give a greater emotional through line to Yaz and the 13th Doctor's relationship, it never came to anything. There were a couple of sweet scenes, but the Doctor dropping Yaz off after ice cream so she could turn into David Tennant didn't feel like the emotional ending this pairing deserved. Number 3. Patrick Troughton in The 2 Doctors. Doctor Who fans love a multi-Doctor Who story, right up until the moment they didn't. Case in point, 1985's The 2 Doctors, featuring Colin Baker and Patrick Troughton. Previous multi-Doctor stories had been big celebratory stories. The 2 Doctors was brutal and nasty, featuring some of Doctor Who's most gruesome deaths. The most egregious element of the story is that the second Doctor becomes a cannibalistic monster with orange eyebrows and a top hat. While giving Troughton something new to do was a good idea to avoid trotting out the same old quirks, it didn't quite work. Worse still, the 6th Doctor is basically there to rescue his previous self and secure his future. There's none of the meeting of minds stuff that defined previous multi-Doctor stories. The other issue is that Colin Baker's Doctor was struggling to make impact with higher-ups, so bringing back Troughton only served to undermine him further. Interestingly, it was Doctor Who co-creator Sidney Newman who suggested that Troughton return to the role to save the show. It's unclear if Newman ever actually saw The 2 Doctors. Number 2. Solving the 13 Lives Conundrum. Even before Peter Capaldi was announced as the 12th Doctor, long-term Doctor Who fans were pondering how the show would deal with the 13 Lives Conundrum. Regeneration limit was introduced by Robert Holmes in The Deadly Assassin, becoming something of an albatross around the show's neck as it approached the Doctor's 12th incarnation. With Gallifrey having been destroyed in the Time War, it was unclear how the Doctor could possibly get a new regeneration cycle. Rather than wait until the end of the 12th Doctor's era to explain this, Stephen Moffat decided to end 11's run by solving this conundrum. Using some slightly dubious numbering, Moffat made Matt Smith the 13th Doctor by including the War Doctor and the second of 3 David Tennant regenerations. After saving Gallifrey in The Day of the Doctor, Clara persuades the Time Lords to give the Doctor a new regeneration cycle, and 2013 ends with Peter Capaldi as the first Doctor in a brand new cycle. 13 full lives ahead of him, here's to the future. Except fans moaned about how convenient and easily solved the problem was. Worse still, they were furious that the numbering had been messed about with so much. Ultimately, it didn't really matter because the Doctor's a timeless child with unlimited regenerations anyway. Number 1. Stories set on Gallifrey. The first big controversy in Doctor Who fandom was Robert Holmes' The Deadly Assassin. Written to convince Tom Baker that he needed a companion to replace the much-missed Elizabeth Sladen, it had the opposite effect by being one of the all-time great Doctor Who stories, establishing a lot of the mythology that continues to define the show in 2023. However, on broadcast in 1976, it attracted the fury of organised Doctor Who fandom, which was in its infancy. The story famously inspired the quote, "What has happened to the magic of Doctor Who?" in a review for the Doctor Who Appreciation Society by Jan Vincent Rudsky. He singled out the fact that Gallifrey was a dull, stuffy planet full of old bureaucrats and scheming politicians, a race of all-powerful beings that had rested on their laurels and become boring. It's almost as if Robert Holmes was trying to show why the Doctor had left his home planet in the first place. Doctor Who fans seem to think that Gallifrey is a fascinating location for a story based on the opportunities it provides to shed light on the Doctor's backstory. However, these stories are almost always hated. The Invasion of Time, overlong and incredibly silly. Arc of Infinity, unbearably dull. Hellbent, ruins heaven sent. Maybe we should have thanked Chris Chibnall for blowing the place up. And that is it for our list today. Don't forget to head over to whatculture.com and check out the original article written by the wonderful Mark Donaldson. You can of course catch myself at Sean Ferrick over on Twitter. You can catch our wonderful editor Danny Megan at Dan the Meegs as well. Look after yourselves until I see you again. Make sure the world treats you well. And above all else, keep things wibbly wobbly. Thanks very much.